This is the true art of genetic selection and manipulation. A human is naturally a learning creature, but it is also violent, selfish, lustful, and undisciplined. So we must walk the knife edge between suppressing the factors that lead to disobedience and destroying the prized capacity for applying intelligence and aggression.
Holly Key, Senior Research Geneticist of Commando.
Chapter 4. Niner was hauling in his canopy when the explosion jerked him upright. A column of white, roiling fire shot into the night sky above the tops of the trees. He knew it was hot and bright because his helmet's visor filter kicked in to stop it from overwhelming his night vision. Even though he knew it was coming, his heart sank. Darman probably hadn't made it. He'd disobeyed his order. He hadn't jumped when he had told him to.
So maybe you've lost a brother. Maybe not. Either way, you'll lose 2 more if you don't get your act together fast, Niner thought.
He triangulated the position of the blast and then went on bundling up the freefall canopy, cutting away the links of cord before burying it. With a breaking strength of 500 kilos, the cord was bound to come in handy. He wound each length in a figure 8 around his thumb and smallest finger and slipped the skeins into a belt pouch, then went in search of his extra pack. It hadn't fallen far from him. The low opening technique worked well if you needed accuracy. Niner found the pack at the edge of a field, covered in small, dark-furred animals that seemed fascinated by it and were gnawing at the soft padding strip on one side. He flashed the spot lamp to scatter them, but they stared back up at the beam, burst into angry chatter, and then turned toward him. It was unnerving, nothing more. Their little teeth snapped impotently on his armor. He stood still, assessing them, his databank scrolling in front of his eyes and telling him that they were Gadans and that they weren't logged as a hostile alien species. All the non-human life Niner had ever seen for real, other than Kaminoans and various instructors, had been on Geonosis and through a blaster site. He was utterly dependent on the intelligence loaded into his database. That, or finding things out for himself. All but one of the Gadans gave him up as inedible within a minute and disappeared into the waist-high crop. The remaining creature worried away at his left boot, a tribute to its tenacity if not its intelligence. Those boots were spec'd to withstand every assault from hard vacuum to acid and molten metal. The little animal clearly believed in aiming high. Darman would have found it fascinating, he was sure. It was a pity to lose him. He had all the makings of a good comrade.
Come on,
Niner said, nudging the animal with the butt of his blaster rifle.
I've got to get to work. Shove off.
The Gadan, teeth locked around a clamp, looked up and met his eyes, or at least it seemed like it. It could only have really seen a faint blue light. Then it let go and trotted back toward the field, pausing once to stare back at him before disappearing into a hole in the ground with all the ease of a diver. Niner took out his datapad and calculated his position. There was no GPS he could lock into without the Neomoidians detecting him, but he could at least use dead reckoning based on the sprayer's last position, matching features on the landscape to his chart. It was old-fashioned soldiering. He liked it. He had to be able to do the business when the tech wasn't there, even if that meant using nothing but a Trandoshan blade.
If you stab someone in the heart, they can still run. I once saw a man run 100 meters like that, screaming as well. Go for the neck like this.
Sergeant Skirata had taught them a lot about knives.
Put a bit of weight behind it, son.
Still, tech had its place. A speeder bike would have been handy, although they hadn't thought they'd need them. The insert was supposed to be 5 clicks from the target.
Never mind, he thought. It would make me look pretty conspicuous out here anyway.
The gear would slow him on his way to the pre-agreed rendezvous point, but he'd get there. If Fee and Aten had landed safely, they'd be heading for RV Alpha 2. He started tabbing, trying to make 10 clicks an hour, avoiding tracks and open ground. In the end, he had to drag the extra pack behind him on straps like a sled. Tactical advance into battle, tabbing, as Skirata called it, meaning walking at 6 to 10 clicks an hour with a 25-kilo pack.
But that's for ordinary men. You are clone commandos. You will do better because you are better,
the instructor would say, as if non-clones were subhuman. Niner was lugging nearly 3 times that load now. He didn't feel better at all right then. He decided to add a portable repulsor lift to his new list of gear to request upon return. Kilara's moon was in its new phase, and he was grateful for that. In his light gray armor, he would have stood out like a beacon.
Hadn't the top brass thought of that either?
Niner thought to himself. He stifled the uncharacteristically critical opinion about his superiors and decided there had to be something he didn't know, but they did. He had his orders. Even so, he diverted to a narrow river shown on the holo chart and stopped long enough to smear mud over his armor and gear. There was no point chancing his luck. At 400 meters from RV Point Alpha, he slowed down, and not because he was struggling under the weight. A silent approach was necessary. He hid the pack he was dragging deep in the undergrowth and recorded its location to collect later. Fee and Atten might have been tracked. They might not have made it at all. There was also the possibility of ambush. No, he definitely wasn't taking chances. For the last 200 meters, he got down in the grass and crawled. But they were there, and alone. Niner found himself staring up into the beam from Fee's helmet, and he knew that the infrared targeting was centered at the point between his infiltration mask and the top of his chest plate. It was a vulnerable point, provided one got close enough and used the right caliber rounds. Not many hostiles could get that close, of course.
"You gave me a start, Sarge,"
Fee said, holding his blaster clear and looking him over. He killed the light and indicated his chest plate.
"Great minds, eh?"
Fee's armor was no longer pristine either. Niner wasn't sure what he'd smeared over it, but it disrupted his outline well enough. The thought had obviously occurred to all of them. Atten was daubed with something dark and matte as well.
"Shape, shine, shadow, silhouette, smell, sound, and movement,"
Niner said, repeating the rules of basic camouflage. If it hadn't been for Darman's absence, he would have found the situation funny. He tried.
"Shame they couldn't find something beginning with S to complete the set." "I could,"
Atten said.
"Any contact from Darman?"
They were 40 kilometers from the point where Niner had landed.
"I saw the blast. He was last off."
You saw him jumping?
"No. He was grabbing as much gear and ordnance as he could salvage."
Niner felt he needed to explain.
"He shoved me out of the hatch first. I shouldn't have let that happen. But I didn't abandon him."
Atten shrugged.
"So what have we got then?"
We've got a brother missing.
"I mean by way of resources. He had most of the demolition ordnance." "I know you mean that, and I don't want to hear it."
If he could feel concern, even sorrow for Darman, then why couldn't Atten? But it was no time to start a fight. They had to stick together now. A 4-man mission with 3 men. Their chances of succeeding had plummeted already.
"We're a squad now. Get used to it."
Fee interrupted. He seemed to have a knack for diffusing situations.
All our gear's intact anyway. We can still put quite a dent in them if we have to.
And what did they have to put a dent in exactly? They had high-altitude drone rekis of the target building, but no idea yet if the walls were just plastered blocks or if they were lined with shock-absorbing alloy plates. There could be just the 30 or so guards seen walking around the perimeter, or hundreds more holed up in the underground barracks. Without better intelligence, they had no way of knowing just how much gear was enough for the job. It was a case of adding P for plenty, just to be sure. Niner liked to be sure.
"How much time are we going to spend looking for him?"
Atten asked.
"They know they've got company now. It wasn't exactly a silent insert." "SOPs,"
Niner said. Standard operating procedures. That's how things should be done, how Commandos expected them to be done.
We get to each RV point for the time we agreed upon, and if he doesn't show, then we'll go to the position of the blast and see what's left. Then we'll decide if we're going to consider him MIA or not.
You'd want us to search if it was you missing.
Fee said to Atten.
He can't call in, not with this range. Too risky.
I wouldn't expect you to compromise the mission for me.
Atten said, distinctly acid.
He's alone, for Fairfax's sake. Alone. Just shut it, will you?
Niner said. The good thing about ultra short-range comlinks was that you could stand around and have a blazing argument inside those helmets, and nobody outside could hear you.
Finding him isn't only the right thing to do, it's the sensible thing to do. Locate him, and we find his gear, okay?
Yes, Sarge.
Fee said.
Got it.
Atten said.
But there has to be a point where we consider him dead. Without a body, that'll be when Geonosis freezes over.
Niner said, still angry and not knowing why.
Until then, we're going to sweat our guts out to find him, provided it doesn't blow the mission. Now let's see if we can sling this gear between some poles or something. We'll never keep this pace up for tens of kilometers unless we find a better way of transporting it.
Niner set his helmet comlink to receive long range anyway. There was no harm in listening. If Darman was out there, Niner wasn't planning on abandoning him.